for that caregiver that's just feeling overwhelmed and feels like they don't have any time for themselves, I would encourage them to just try to find and incorporate what I like to call micro moments of joy. So, whatever those might be for yourself, making a list of 4 or 5 things that really do bring you some joy and
Mm.
incorporating those throughout your day so that you don't feel like your day is just the mundane and monotonous tasks of caregiving, but you're like soothing yourself and you're bringing joy to yourself as well.
Welcome to another episode of the Juggling Life Finding Balance podcast. I'm your host, Vivian Cummins, and I cannot wait for y'all to meet my guest today. Her name is Jess Ronne. She is the author of several books, including Caregiving with Grit and Grace, and she's also the associate producer of the documentary Unseen: How We're Failing Parent Caregivers. She is the founder and executive director of the Lucas Project, a nonprofit dedicated to serving parent caregivers. Jess has shared her inspiring story on the Today Show, and her journey began when she became a widow within 10 years of marriage after her husband passed away of a brain tumor. Left to raise 4 children, including one needing lifelong care, she joined the other 16.3 million individuals serving as caretakers to children with special needs. Jess's life took another surprising turn when she was introduced to a young widower and father of 3. And in 2011, they blended their families with 8 children. Drawing from her own experiences, Jess can provide advice for caregivers on the importance of being present with their loved ones, embracing your challenges as personal growth, and finding strength in faith. You guys do not want to miss this episode, so please settle in, grab those earbuds, and let's get started. Good morning, Jess. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm so glad I've had the opportunity to get to know you a little bit before we hit record. But I've had a chance to get to know you, but our audience hasn't. So if you would take a few minutes, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on your show. And that is a big, loaded question. There's a lot that I could talk about. But I guess in a nutshell, I am an author, a speaker, a nonprofit founder. I'm a mom to 8 beautiful children, including one who has profound disabilities and will require care for the rest of his life. I'm a wife. We live in West Michigan. I'm a podcast host. And I grew up as the oldest of 12 or 11 siblings. So that's kind of
Wow.
a fun fact about myself.
That is a lot. Now, I only have one sibling. I have an older sister. She's 6 years older than me, so I cannot imagine. I mean, that's like a classroom of kids.
It was, yes, and now at 47 years old, I kinda look back and I'm like, "Gosh, I've kinda been in this caregiver role my whole life," and that's really interesting to process even, because I was born, and then 2 years later, my mom had twins. So, all these
Oh,
pictures are, of little 2-year-old Jessica with these twin babies in her hands.
oh my
And then she just
yes.
went on to have, babies every 2 years or so. I'm like, I've kind
Wow.
of been in this role my whole life.
Yeah. We're gonna talk, today. You have a wonderful book out, and we'll get into that here in a little bit, but, you did write a book about caregiving, and I would just like to hear a little bit more about your story. You mentioned Lucas, your son. So in your story, you talk about when you became pregnant with your 2nd child, Lucas, that you received some devastating news that's when it kinda thrust you back into that caregiving role since childhood. So if you would, share with us what led to your becoming a caregiver the second time in life.
Yeah, my caregiving journey really began, like you mentioned, in 2004 when I went to what I thought was a routine ultrasound appointment for my second child. And it was there we were told that he had experienced a stroke in utero and there was very little hope. It was suggested that we terminate and try again. In the doctor's words, you're young and healthy. You won't have any problems getting pregnant. It's just nature's way. These babies aren't supposed to make it. And my husband Jason and I decided instead to put the baby in the Lord's hands and trusted that God's will would be done. And Lucas was born almost on his due date, and he just came out screaming with life on August 12th, 2004. And after undergoing brain surgery and spending 2 weeks in the NICU, we were handed our miracle baby with, like, a stack of papers and just kinda this umbrella special needs diagnosis. Nobody really knew what his future was going to look like, and we just went home elated that we were going home with a live baby after being told that, we would probably be burying our child. So we went home and life was very challenging with him. He hardly ever slept. He had a 2-year-old size head at birth. And so I hardly ever slept because I was terrified if he were to roll over somehow, he would suffocate himself in the middle of the night because he did not have the strength to lift his head back up. Numerous ear infections, was delayed in every aspect of life. But by the grace of God, we somehow made it through. And by like 3 years old, we kind of settled into a new normal. I found myself pregnant again with our third child, which turned out to be a daughter, Mabel. And about 6 months after she was born, my husband, Jason, started having all of these unexplained health problems. And he repeatedly went to the doctor where they just kept saying, you have to get your diabetes under control, which was such a strange diagnosis because he was a personal trainer. He owned a gym. He was a tennis professional. And just out of the blue, he has type 1 diabetes. And one night, he passed out at home and was rushed to the local ER, and it was discovered that he had a baseball-sized brain tumor in his head, and that began my second journey as a caregiver. I would end up caring for him for 3 years as he battled cancer. We would go on to have another child in the middle of that battle, and Jason would ultimately lose his battle with brain cancer 1 month before his infant son turned 1 years old.
Oh my goodness, such devastating loss. I'm really sorry that you went through all of that. So I guess I have some questions about kind of where you were in that season. Number one, getting that diagnosis of your unborn child. So how did you and your husband at the time kinda you said that you had made those decisions, that you were going to not abort the pregnancy, and, so how did you guys come to those decisions? Were you in church at the time? Were you, had a relationship with the Lord? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we were both raised in Christian homes, and our faith just wouldn't allow us to take life into our hands. It was up to God, and I was willing to be obedient to whatever He called me to do, even if it looked foolish, like carrying a dead baby, which is, to the world, it did look kind of foolish. But, God calls us to do a lot of foolish things, and our only job, or what would appear to be foolish, and our job is to obey what He calls us to do. And so, um, I just pressed into the Lord so deeply. I look back on that period of life in that remaining 4 months of pregnancy, and it was probably the sweetest communion I've had with the Lord because I was just completely immersed in His strength. I had no strength on my own. It was the loneliest experience I've ever walked through, carrying a baby that I had bonded with, that I kept feeling kick and move, but I
Yeah.
was told that I was carrying a dead baby and not to have any hope that I would bring this baby home. And so the Lord just became my constant companion. And I often think of it as, Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. I leaned in so heavily to the shepherd's care during that time and just walked beside him and let him provide that peace and that self-care and that mercy and that grace during that period. And he really upheld me. But then in contrast, if I'm being completely honest, when I was walking through the valley of the shadow of death with Jason, I reacted very differently. I was very angry. I tapped into anger as almost a fuel to get me through my days. I had 4 children, 3 in diapers, a dying husband, and I was absolutely floundering in despair and grief and just absolute overwhelm. And during those periods, I felt like I sort of took the rod out of the shepherd's hand and chucked it into the forest and was like, you know what? forget it. I need to do this on my own. You haven't been faithful. Like, this isn't fair. Why would you heap all of this on my young shoulders? Because I was 32 years old at the time when Jason passed away. I was 33. So, but ultimately it came down to, the Lord and I, God and I, in this wrestling. I mean, he wasn't wrestling with me. I was wrestling with him and lamenting and wailing and saying, I don't understand it. But ultimately I fell to my knees and surrender and said, you are God and I am not. And I don't know why you would call me to such a challenging existence, but I will be obedient and faithful to what you call me to do.
The anger that, I've not experienced the loss that you have experienced, but I have experienced the anger and I'm kind of still in that. So if we could, I'd like to talk a little bit about that because I think sometimes as Christians, we think, "Uh-oh, we can't be mad at God." And God gave us our emotions and anger is one of them, right? And it's natural and he's such a big God. He can take our temper tantrums and our anger, he can take that. But it's what we do with it. I think that really matters. But and you said, you came around and everything, but in the midst of that anger, what did you say to God? Like, did you ask him to, like, remove this from me, or are you just expressing the anger? How did you work through it?
I was expressing the anger, late at night after the kids were in bed and my husband's laying in his hospice bed in our den. And it was just more of a mode that I
Mhm,
operated in. I was
mhm,
stressed. I was short. I wasn't
mm,
very patient. I wasn't very kind. I wasn't very loving. I was just
yeah,
mad.
yeah,
And, it came out late at night as I was showering after everybody was finally in bed, and the tears were just streaming down my face. And I'm like on my knees in the shower, hands raised in surrender. It just, God, like almost like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane as he was wrestling with God the Father and saying, lamenting, "Please take this cup from me, but not my will, but thine be done." And that's what it came down to for me, like a total death to myself, a
mm,
total death to
mhm,
my ego, and saying, "You are God and I am not, and I still choose you in spite of my anger, in spite of all the unfairness that I feel you have handed me. I choose to put my trust in you." And it's a choice, and it was a hard choice. Because I don't know that most people would have faulted me if I would have stepped away from my faith at that
right,
point. Uh,
right,
and a friend even said to me, who is not a believer, I so badly want to believe, but I look at what God is making you walk through, and I can't understand how a good God would do that to an individual. Um,
yeah.
and those are hard questions to answer even as you're walking through such a challenging period with your husband and your children.
Yeah, and it's just like, Job, right?
Mm.
When he was, dealing with all of the losses, his own wife said, "Curse God and die," and it's like,
Right.
it's not helpful, right? But just like him, though, you were such a testimony, though, for her in that you did surrender and you did, give it to God, and so her seeing you do that, I'm sure has been a huge testimony for her as well. Um Oh, goodness, that's heartbreaking. I wanna kinda shift a little bit because your book is about, caregiving, and so at some point, you kinda had to come to the realization that your life is kind of centered around caregiving, and so that with your son, which is a lifelong, thing, and then, of course, that season with your husband. So how have you come to terms with that this is, your calling, one of your callings in life?
Kind of kicking and screaming, I think. People ask me, when did it shift from like being Lucas's mom to like being a parent caregiver? And I think that shift for me began to occur when he began to go through puberty. And even wrote a poem about it called When He Outgrew Cute that ended up going viral, but about how the shift occurs when they're no longer these cute little children anymore. And instead, they're 13, 14, 15 years old. And even as a little boy, when he was 5 or 6 and he's in diapers and he's nonverbal and he's, manageable, we were still able to find help. We were still able to
Yeah.
find babysitters to step into that situation. When he's 14, 15, 16, and he's in diapers and he's nonverbal and he's becoming aggressive and his behaviors are challenging and he's lashing out at me and his dad and his siblings, I think that's when I honestly started to even grieve the fact that I was a special needs mom. I don't even know that I grieved anything about raising Lucas up until that point when he became very challenging, and I recognized that this is a forever gig that the Lord
Mhm.
has called me to, and I'm not so sure about that, because it's becoming very challenging. It's affecting our whole family, and, um that's when I think that shift even occurred from just being Lucas's mom to a recognition that I will be his mom and I will be his forever caregiver, and the heavy responsibility that I began to feel in that calling.
Oh, I'm sure you questioned God a lot on that, and you always hear that saying, "God never gives us more than we can handle, and He
Mhm.
equips the called," and all of that. How were you, maneuvering through those emotions? Knowing God, knowing He's a good God, but also giving you such a heavy, heavy load for life.
Well, I'm a problem solver, and so we we needed respite. So I started a nonprofit that provided respite for our family. We needed awareness. And so I created a film that brought awareness to families like ours and a podcast. And I wrote books and I speak about it. And most recently, we needed a forever home for Lucas. And we actually created a group home for Lucas and his friends. And he moved into that home a couple of months ago. And now that I've had some time to even process and step back from this long journey of being a caregiver advocate and sort of having everything in my life really revolve around creating solutions for Lucas and our family, I've recognized that the thread was always Lucas. It was providing Lucas and our family what we needed. And in turn, it helped so many other families. But and then recognizing too, like, "Oh, I am a problem solver." I don't see things as, like, unfixable or um, unchangeable, and I think I often question, why would God want me first of all, why would he want me to be a caregiver? Because I'm not the most sympathetic or empathetic person in the world. I would make a horrible nurse, and then why would he sort of appoint me caregiver advocate, which is this strange realm that I now find myself in, and I think it is because of the ability to problem solve and not to see any problem really as an obstacle, but to look at it in a fresh way and to view it as, "Okay, so this might be challenging, but how are we gonna solve this?" Um,
Mhm.
and I've only recently come to that realization in having that space and that time to process what has been driving me for all these years to create all these resources for families. And I think it was always Lucas was the thread, and solving what our family needed was that thread. But it's been fantastic to see how many other families it's helped out as
Right.
well.
Right. That is so beautiful. You mentioned, yeah, that's great. You've mentioned many things that you've been involved with. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is a book that you have out. And I have it here and I'd like to put it on camera if I could show everybody. It's so beautiful. I see you have it in the background as well. And it's called Caregiving with Grit and Grace 100 Days of Hope and Encouragement. And I love devotionals. I write devotionals as well, and, there's these are so powerful. They're short, little, powerful daily nuggets. And so I'd like for you, if you would, tell us about who's the audience for this book. And I kinda think we already know what inspired you to write it, but if there's anything else you'd like to share about the inspiration behind it.
Yeah, I think the audience is a caregiver in any capacity, really. Whether you're caring for a disabled child or an elderly parent or a spouse, or even I've heard mothers of young children say they've read it and they were really able to glean a lot of truth and application out of it as well. Or, a teacher at your child's school or a bus aide. Um, I don't I don't think there's really anybody in any sort of caregiving realm that wouldn't receive something of value out of this book. And as for the inspiration, that's kind of a funny story. My husband told me for years I should write a devotional for caregivers. And I was like, I don't really think I'm the person to write a devotional. I guess in my mind, you have to be like on a different spiritual plane than maybe I.
Yeah.
I struggle a lot. I get angry. Like God and I have words a lot. So I didn't feel like maybe I was the perfect person for that. But it's funny, just like I didn't think I was the perfect person to be, in a caregiver role. God was like, "No, I'm gonna use you and all your imperfections, and you're gonna rely on me for strength." So we created a proposal and sent it out, and a publisher wanted it. And the really beautiful, interesting thing about this book is that while we were creating the group home for Lucas, is when I was writing this book. And
Ugh.
so while I was grieving and processing the fact that I would be handing my child over to the care of other individuals who would be his primary caregivers, and I would be taking a secondary role, God was downloading almost this love letter to my soul, which became this book, which is now sort of my downloaded love letter to caregivers in all capacities.
God uses everything, right? And I just love how he's woven your experiences to make such a beautiful product for so many people. And you are the right person to write this, and you do have a wonderful testimony to share. You also mentioned the documentary, and if we could, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. Maybe you can tell people where they could find it. But it's called Unseen: How We're Failing Parent Givers and Why It Matters. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, the documentary came out of that period when Lucas was becoming very challenging. We lived in rural Tennessee. Like I'd mentioned, the behaviors were really amping up. He was nonverbal, he was becoming very aggressive. And I knew, part of the nonprofit's mission statement was to bring recognition to these families. And, my podcast was kind of doing the job, my speaking, my books, but I wanted to bring awareness like on a really big scale. And so I thought, we need to create a documentary somehow and peel back the curtain and show the world our lives as special needs families, because so often we live such isolated, forgotten lives because the world isn't made for families like ours, and it becomes just easier to stay home. And so people aren't even aware that families like ours often exist. And I hopped on Facebook. I just said, "Hey, I have this great idea. We should create a documentary, peeling back the curtain for special needs families. If there's a filmmaker or producer out there that would want to meet with me, please reach out." The next day, this filmmaker and producer from Nashville left a little comment on my post, and we ended up meeting for lunch. And the rest was history. 4 years later, we
You divine. I like it.
created this documentary, Unseen: How We're Failing Parent Caregivers and Why It Matters. It ended up on PBS last year and is headed to ABC this February. So next month it will be on ABC. We're really excited about that. And you can find out more on it at caregiverdoc.com. And just another little side note, we have started production for a second documentary called Uncertain, which will explore the housing crisis for disabled adults in America and their families, and what we need to do to provide more accessible housing options, long term options, and address the direct care staffing shortage as well.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. Just from one little Facebook post.
Yeah. Well,
That is so cool.
yeah. My family jokes that my tombstone will say, "Jess had a great idea," and some really bad ideas. I'm a big believer, throw an arrow at the board, and if it sticks, it sticks,
That's right. That's amazing. We'll make sure we have those links in the show notes so people know where to go and where to watch. Ah, that's really amazing. You've got other books out. We want to make sure that you share those before we end today's show, because you've got more than one out there that I know will help other people. So this season on the Juggling Life Finding Balance podcast, we're talking a lot about wellness and self care. And caregivers typically do not prioritize self care, and nor do they ask for help. Tell us why that is.
That is because of the martyr caregiver syndrome. Or
Okay.
we believe that nobody can do the job quite like we can, and although we desperately need help, we our pride doesn't allow us to accept help or ask for help. And I'll often say to caregivers, you're no good to anybody if you end up dying. So
You're
either you're gonna take some time to take care of yourself and accept help from others, or you are going to die or have an illness yourself, and then you won't be any good to your loved ones. So it's being intentional about prioritizing that time, accepting the help when it comes our way, because it does come our way quite often in that role. But our pat response is, no, I'm fine. Everything's fine. You don't have to bring me a meal. And I would just suggest to people too, don't leave it open ended.
right.
Say something more like, not, do you need a meal? But hey, I'm going to bring a meal Wednesday night. Do you prefer lasagna or tacos? I'll leave it on your front porch so you don't even have to open the door and just do it. Or we're showing up with a church crew Saturday to do yard work for you. Leave a list on your front porch and we will just take care of it and you don't even have to see us, type of thing. Um, just be really firm in your offers, because for some reason we can't accept it very easily. And then two, don't feel like you have to necessarily help with the loved one. I know a lot of people shy away from offering to help special needs families because they feel like, well, I don't really want to step into that situation because I don't know that I would feel comfortable caring for that child. And I would just really encourage everybody to understand that you don't have to provide care for that child,
Right.
but understand that we have to-do lists that are never ending. So if you can just take some things off of our to-do list, like picking up groceries or meds, or send some gift cards in the mail for dinner, or just look at your gifts. I had one woman once offer to cut my kid's hair in the comfort of our home because she knew it was really challenging for me to get out with Lucas. This was after Jason passed away. I had another family offer to take all of my kids back to school shopping after Jason passed away so that I could stay home with Lucas.
Mhm.
So just like really get creative, but there are really a million ways that you can step in and help a caregiving family.
That I love that. I was gonna ask you the question, a follow-up question on what are some ways that you can prioritize yourself as a caregiver, but I think you just answered that. Is the number one thing could potentially be just to accept help.
Hmm.
Ask for and accept the help, and I think that
Yeah.
that's a wonderful way that you can exercise self-care in that space.
Yeah. And just being, yeah, intentional about asking, setting aside your pride and sending a
Right,
text to a couple of close friends or family members and saying, I am just
right,
drowning. Can you
right.
step in and provide some help in some way?
And I think too, a lot of times I'm kind of thinking through that now of where I could come up higher in helping people. We don't know what we don't know. And so if people don't tell us, we don't know that there's a need. But then there's also me taking that step to see if there is a need, right? And checking in with some folks. So that was very good, wise advice there. I want to talk just really briefly about kind of shifting gears on you a little bit. So, you've shared with us your first husband, and you are remarried, and you have a pretty cool love story with your new husband. What's his name again? Is he
Right.
Ryan? Ryan. And it was actually featured on the Today Show. And so I would love it if you just take a minute and tell us how the two of you got together.
Yeah, that is a fun story. It's interesting. At Jason's funeral, his mom pulled me aside and said, Jess, I just want you to know I'm praying for your next husband. And I was like, Mom, a little soon, I'm good. She's like, no, you can't do this life. I mean, it was 4 children, 7 and under, Luke, profoundly disabled. It was intense. And I said, well, we'll just leave that up to the Lord. Well, 3 months later, I got all the kids ready to go out trick or treating and, posted all the pictures on Facebook. I look back, I just have bags under my eyes, like, I'm a single mom with these 4 young children, and I'm just showing everybody that we're doing fine, and I came home, put them all to bed, and I checked my blog that I had kept updated through the 3 years that Jason was battling cancer, and a woman, a stranger actually from Pennsylvania, left a comment on my blog just saying, I have no idea why I'm asking you to do this, but there is this young widower in Oklahoma. He lost his wife to brain cancer 4 days after Jason died. He has 3 young children and he's not doing very well. And I just think you could be a source of encouragement to him. So I found his blog and left a comment and woke up the next day to an email from this man named Ryan Ronnie. And that led to numerous emails, phone calls, and long story short, we were married within the year. He moved to Michigan. We adopted each other's children, and we went on to have an eighth and final child together who will be turning 10 this summer. So
Oh my gosh, you guys are the Brady Bunch. For those listeners that remember watching the Brady Bunch.
yeah, just a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, that is a gorgeous story. I love that. I was from a little teeny tiny town called Ninnekah. Many people don't know what that is. I'll have to look.
Okay.
It's
Diamonds in the panhandle.
so yeah, that was far away from me, but
Okay.
so oh my gosh, that is a wonderful story. And you were married within the year that you met?
Yes. We were married very quickly.
You know what? Hey, when it's God ordained, I mean, why wait, right?
Right. I mean, we're going on 14 years, so
That's
something
wonderful.
worked out well.
I agree. Oh, that is a beautiful story. I'm gonna put the link. I think I have a link to the Today Show clip as well. Oh my goodness. So I could talk to you forever. I just met you this morning, and I've been kind of following through your stuff, but I feel like I've known you for so long. This has been really fun. As we kind of come to a close today, I would love for you to do a couple of things. Number one, if you could give us some wisdom, if for those who might be listening or watching today, maybe they're struggling with their role as a caregiver and they can't seem to find that balance between that and caring for themselves. I'd love to hear some wisdom that you might have for them. And then also too, share with us how folks can reach you. They can get your books. Tell us a little bit more about your books, how they might be able to get in contact with you.
Yeah, first for that caregiver that's just feeling overwhelmed and feels like they don't have any time for themselves, I would encourage them to just try to find and incorporate what I like to call micro moments of joy. So, whatever those might be for yourself, for me, it's like reading a good book for 10 minutes or taking 10 minutes just to stretch, eating a nice piece of dark chocolate and really savoring it, or, making a nice cup of decaf coffee. But making a list of 4 or 5 things that really do bring you some joy and
Mhm.
incorporating those throughout your day so that you don't feel like your day is just the mundane and monotonous tasks of caregiving, but you're like soothing yourself and you're bringing joy to yourself as well. And then all the places people can find me, I'm at jessronne.com. The lucasproject.org is where you can find everything about the nonprofit. Caregiverdoc.com, and then Facebook is Jess Ronnie Official. Instagram is Jess plus the mess. Um, so I'm at all the places. If you head to my website, I think I have buttons there. I'm not on my website that often, but I think I still have buttons there somewhere.
We get buttons.
For all
I saw them.
all my social links.
Oh, thank you so much. We're gonna make sure all of that is in the show notes, and let me get the book up here one more time. And folks, please, I'm sure this is on all the places. Amazon, you can get it everywhere. Is this in the bookstores or do you?
Some I've been told
Okay,
it's on
perfect.
Target and Barnes and Noble.
Oh, love it. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, make sure listeners, watchers, make sure you grab this book, follow her on her website and all the socials. And Jess, it has been an absolute joy to get to know you this morning. And thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Juggling Live Finding Balance podcast. Have you grabbed your free Restoring Balance study guide yet? If not, you can grab yours today by visiting my website, viviancummins.com. If you've enjoyed today's show, we would love for you to subscribe to our channel and then share with your friends and loved ones. Until next time, be blessed and stay balanced.